I hope you've had a good day yesterday. And yeah, I want to carry on exploring consciousness through this model of the Yodichara. But let's start with, as we did yesterday, with a few minutes of just settling, sitting, and I'll lead us in a very, very brief body awareness practice. And like yesterday, what I'd like us to do is see if we can become aware of our direct experience of the senses, which is obviously related to this model of consciousness, without any conceptual overlay, if we can manage that. Okay, so closing our eyes when we're ready. Making sure you're comfortable. You can sit still for 5 or so minutes. And taking a few deeper breaths. And as you breathe out, it's almost as if you're breathing out a sigh of relief, letting go of the weight of the body, but also any holding on, any tension in the body. Imagining that tension dropping away, melting away into the ground. Softening the face, the eyes, the muscles around the eyes and mouth, allowing them to soften. Becoming aware of sensations of contact that the body makes with the support of the chair, with the ground, but also contact of clothing against skin. All the sensations of contact arising from that contact. See if you can become aware of the sensations. And also internal sensations in the body. Perhaps sensations in the chest and in the belly as you breathe, changing sensations. And including in your awareness any contact and sensations from the other senses. Sounds, any visual sensations, taste and smell. Just bare awareness of the sensory world. Now also including a sense of your inner world. Any thoughts, a sense of how you're feeling in yourself. How your energy feels, what your mood is like. Just becoming aware of how you are. And if you don't know how you are, that's fine too. Just noticing whatever's present in your experience. And then imaginatively broadening out to include everyone here on retreat, all of us together. Physically, we're separate, but consciousness is not just physical and not so separate. And then when you're ready, coming out of the meditation and opening your eyes. Okay, very good. So hopefully you're ready for more input, and I'm going to continue exploring this model of consciousness. And just a reminder of where we've got to. We've looked at well, we started off by just saying consciousness has depth and that there is the potential for, in a way, a whole new type of consciousness that's somehow already, you could say, in us, although that's already using metaphor. But you could say there's another dimension of consciousness in us that we've been calling this radiant awareness, this sky-like awareness that is unbounded, and that in a sense isn't personal, because it doesn't have this sense of me and mine. You could, although Buddhism doesn't use this sort of language, think of it almost like a universal consciousness. But remember, consciousness isn't a thing, and we don't want to make it into a thing. We don't want to make universal consciousness into a thing, but somehow it transcends the personal. And at the same time, it's not impersonal. Bhante calls it suprapersonal, more than personal. There's a sense that it is it's the enlightened mind, and it's our true potential. And it is, in a way, the source of all freedom and bliss and metta, love. And it's, in a way, what is arising in every moment of consciousness. It's there as a potential to be realized, but we cover it over. And we cover it over with delusion and with egocentricity. And all of that arises in what we were calling the manas. If we were able just to stay with sense experience without this sort of construction of me in here and a world out there, if we could just stay with experience without that construction, there's the potential for this radiance to break through. And sometimes it does break through. And sometimes it breaks through just sort of without any warning. And we've talked about our peak experiences where that might have happened. And then Buddhism's a sort of systematic path to that radiance, allowing it more and more to come into our lives and to govern our lives and be the. It's not even just a passive radiance. Radiance makes it sound sort of beautiful but passive, but actually it's more like a force that comes through us. And it's the force of love and awareness and wisdom. It's a force that we're trying to open up to. Anyway, I'm using all sorts of mixed metaphors here, but hopefully they evoke something of the spirit of what we're trying to at least understand conceptually, because if we can have a sense of it conceptually, I think at least we can know where we're orientating our Dharma lives. But more than that, sometimes having a sense of reflecting on the nature of consciousness allows the breakthrough to happen. Study can be a practice in its own right. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so I'm going to try and share my screen with you again and go back to our diagrams and see if we can build it up a bit more. So, I am unable to share Kamlanaga. Can I? Also, I'm aware that we had questions from yesterday that I didn't get to, and we've lost them because the chats from yesterday has gone. So could you bear them in mind anyway? Because I don't want to just forget them. There were some good questions, and I'm sorry not to have got to them yesterday. And you'll probably have more questions. Okay, so I'm gonna see if I can. There you go. So that's relatively familiar. I've added in the words Klistomanovignana under Manus. It's just another name for that consciousness that you might come across. So far, hopefully you're familiar. Oh, and there we go. We've got this Arya Vijnana, this, I love the way that just popped up, which is this deepest dimension of consciousness that we're trying to, well, in a way, uncover. So I'm gonna, the Arya Vijnana happens to be red. I want to come back to, I want to stop sharing. Okay, so you hold that image in your mind. There's this big blob of redness behind the Manas. That's the Arya Vijnana. It's difficult to talk about this level of consciousness because we're not aware of it in our ordinary mind. It's deep within the other layers. We can't normally see it. Um, uh, and yet this model isn't just an abstract theory. It really isn't just an abstract theory. It's arising from people's meditative experiences. It's the Yogacara which is trying to give a description of people's actual experiences. And it's said that in meditation, you can have this experience of a deeper dimension of consciousness. If we let go of the defilements, if we let go of all the clouds, this other dimension of consciousness can break through. Anyway, it's the Arya Vijnana. Arya means storehouse, and it's the storehouse consciousness. And what's stored is impressions from our past actions. They're said to be like seeds. All our past actions, willed actions, all our karmic actions, the skillful, the unskillful, and the somewhere in between, they all leave impressions in the Arya from this life, but also from previous lives. And those seeds, those impressions, can fructify either in this life or in future lives. So this is a model for how the law of karma works. When we act with conscious volition, it leaves an impression in the Arya, a seed in the Arya. And those seeds can be skillful or seeds can be from skillful actions or unskillful actions. And then at some point, when the conditions are sort of right, those seeds can flower. Flower is perhaps not the right word, fructify. For unskillful actions, they're going to fructify as painful consequences. And for skillful actions, they'll fructify as favorable consequences. But there's another dimension to the Arya. There's another dimension to the Arya, which is, in a way, nothing to do with our personal karmic stream. It's called the absolute Arya. And in a way, this is reality itself. It's absolute reality. It's what the enlightened mind dwells in. It's what the Buddha realized under the Bodhi tree and became, as it were, his mind became released into the absolute Arya, which is beyond distinctions of me and you, or even beyond subject and object. And it's beyond time and space itself. So I'm going to try and share again, and hopefully the illustrations help. Okay, so that's the 8 consciousnesses so far that we've talked about, and you can see that there are 3 levels. The green, the blue, and the red are trying to indicate 3 levels of consciousness. There's what we know of in the green as our sort of ordinary common sense consciousness. The manas is below that, beneath that, and we're not normally aware of it. And it's where these instincts of, it's not even instincts, a very, very deep-seated delusion of me and world arise from. And the Alya is deeper than that, even still. And it's as if in every moment of consciousness, all of these are present. The Alya is unfolding in radiant, pristine pureness. The manas is operating and clouding it over. And then all of our sense consciousnesses are also operating and well, having sense experience. Okay, and then this is an illustration, or my attempt at illustrating, that the Alya is also has a deeper level still, the absolute Alya, and what is then called the relative Alya. And in the relative Alya, I've tried to show a few seeds. I ran out of time this morning, so the seeds are a bit sparse, but there they go. They're trying to say, look, there's seeds from our karmic impressions from our karmic actions that fructify. So I'll let you just sort of absorb that a moment, and then we'll see if there are any questions from that, and then I want to sort of move on. So the Alya is the storehouse consciousness, and it can be split into 2. Okay, so any questions from what I sort of have whizzed over some of what we've done yesterday, and then added in this Alya, this notion of the Alya Vijnana, and the fact that it's got these kind of 2 dimensions. If there are no questions, that's fine, but particularly I don't want to move on if there's any unclarity, or whether people have, whether I've lost you. Oh, Darren says, what does fructify mean? Just come into fruition. Yeah. Like a seed becomes a fruit. Oh, and Shubhanaga's asking something. What are you asking, Shubhanaga? Hang on. I've lost my chat.
Do you want me to ask it directly?
Oh, yeah, go on then. That's nice. It's nice to hear.
I don't know whether it's all that clear, my question, the way I've written it, but I just want, the way we talk about karma is obviously within time, and I was just wondering whether the Alya sits outside of the sort of framework of, we were talking yesterday, the day before, about space and time sort of being within consciousness and being a construct. So I just wondered if you could clarify.
I don't. Yes, I can see your question, and I'm not completely sure. Like the absolute Alya is said to be definitely outside of time and space. The relative Alya seems to somehow operate. This law of karma seems to operate in time, but in a way, maybe it's like where the timeless is meeting time. Um, I'm not completely sure I can be clear because I don't know. I think somebody else might be able to say something more clear than I can, and if you can, then do. But it's like we're at the edge of conceptualization. But remember, these seeds are they can bear fruit not just in this lifetime, but at any lifetime when the conditions are right. So there's an element of somehow they're not in time in a certain sense, and yet they bear fruit in time. Um, there seems to be this underlying. I was talking about Bohm a couple of days ago, David Bohm, saying that there's this underlying order that isn't in time and space that seems to be unfolding as time and space and as a world of time and space, a phenomena in time and space. But it's unfolding every moment, and it's not unfolding randomly. It seems to, well, what Buddhism says, it's unfolding in according to the law of praticca samutpada, and according to conditioned co-production. Conditions are not their unfoldment is not random. It's according to certain laws that Bhante has talked quite a bit about, the niyamas, and karma is one of them. So there seems to be unfoldment in time of phenomena according to what we think of as conditionality. But that unfoldment seems to be happening from a deeper dimension, at least according to this model. Oh yes, Kamala Mati's got her hand up. Kamala Mati, do you want to unmute?
Well, I'm just thinking that when I was a newcomer
Yeah.
to meditation and Buddhism, I think I'd have found this very, very confusing perhaps, and very a bit mind-boggling. And I'm just wondering for any newcomers that are here, I mean, I can't obviously mind read them, but I just wondered if you'd got anything to sort of help people to feel okay about this stuff. Does that make
sense? Well, let's
just
see. First of all, let's see if there are any people who are boggled beyond. I mean, some of it is, some of it's at the edge of what you can understand anyway. But if you're confused in a way that's more sort of unhelpful than that, then do say. I'm not sure I can make it clearer without knowing what your confusion is. But it's a good point. Don't be frightened of saying if I can help.
So, hey, this is Jeanette. Sorry. Thank you for that. By the way, I'm one of, I think, the newest people in here. I would say the vocabulary is a hindrance because I don't understand half of the terms you guys are using, but the concept is, I think, as much as you can intuit, I suppose, is fine, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And red's my favorite color, so I'm super happy that that love is red.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
Yes, the vocabulary is new, but the concepts, if in a way, they're the most important things to sort of try and get your head around, is that we've got this sort of ordinary world of the senses with our 5 sense consciousnesses and my mind that sort of brings that world together. Then we've got a deeper dimension of consciousness that seems to be the root of this division into me and world, which Buddhism would say is a delusion. And then we've got this deeper layer still, which is something to do with the nature of reality, out of which everything, this phenomenal world, including ourselves, seems to emerge. So although the model is sort of mind-boggling, I think it's also worth trying to engage with, because actually it's pointing to something in our experience if we pay attention to. So for example, if you've been meditating, one of the things we were saying is that consciousness has depth, and your experience can change after a meditation. You know, you've still got ordinary visual impressions, but suddenly the world can look more beautiful or radiant even. And this is a model that's trying to explain that deeper dimension of consciousness. And why it's also important is because what it's also saying is that enlightened consciousness is our own potential. The Buddha's experience of a transcendent consciousness that's beyond me and you, beyond this world of phenomena, is our own potential, because that's the deepest dimension of our own experience. Although we don't always experience it. Usually we cover it over. Yeah. Can you think of anything, Kamalamaki, to add that would help?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to obviously make any assumptions on behalf of anybody else at all. And I think what Jeanette says, you know, about some of the terms, I mean, I know there's someone in my group who hasn't come across puja before, hasn't come across, you know, and was asking, you know, the questions about what, if you like, the kind of basic Buddhist vocabulary means, which is great. So I suppose it's that made me just want to perhaps, just see if there was any, I suppose it might be a case of reassuring people that it's okay not to get it first time round. Something like that, yeah.
Well, that's a good point. I think that what we're talking about is very deep stuff. But it's all right also not to, so it's all right to not sort of grasp it. It's also all right to not worry too much about the terms. At the same time, we're all adults, and even if you're new, we can learn new terms, and it's quite good to be introduced to Buddhist vocabulary, because Buddhist vocabulary can be more precise than our ordinary vocabulary. And we don't have English terms for some of these things. So for example, in English, in Western culture, we have a notion of the subconscious. We have a different model of consciousness. And, you know, psychoanalysis has explored the subconscious, but it's a different model. And I wouldn't say that the subconscious is sort of covered by any of what we've looked at so far. I wouldn't want to equate the Alaya with the subconscious, for example. So because it's a different model, it's like it needs its own terms. But don't worry about the terms being foreign if they confuse you. What's more important is to, in a way, just keep coming back to, excuse me, this notion that mind has depth, and that's worth exploring. That's worth exploring. Oh, Artapriya has something.
I mean, this might be oversimplifying things, Jnanavaca, but I suppose one way of looking at what you're saying is, first of all, that it is possible to change consciousness, and you've shown us that that is what it does. We can have a different experience of consciousness. The other positive thing about confusion sometimes is that it makes you think, doesn't it? It makes you think
That's
through
right.
your assumptions.
That's right.
And we can think, yeah, we know what our mind is,
That's
you
right.
know, but this is, it's kind of irritating in a certain kind of way, stimulating.
Yeah, yeah.
There is more to mind than meets the eye.
I mean, that's right. I've been coming across this model for 20 years, and I'm seeing more and more in it. And I think it's Buddhism's a bit like that. When you encounter it, you can be introduced to, I don't know, the notion that the Buddha gained enlightenment. And then over the years of practice, you realize more and more of what that means and the implications of that. And I think that it's not so much what Bhante said is that you just go deeper and deeper into the teachings and you unfold them more and more. And if you're new to this model, you'll get something from it. And if you're familiar from it, you might be getting something more. But in a way, yes, you're right, Attapriya, that what we're trying to say is that consciousness can change and that we don't have to settle for the experience of the world that we normally have. We don't have to settle for that, because I think a lot of people do assume that the only way to change the experience of the world that they have is to change the outer world. Buddhism's really radical by saying, no, you can change your consciousness. Excuse me. And if you change your consciousness, your world can change. And not only can you change your consciousness a little bit, like becoming a little bit more aware or a little bit more kind, which is no bad thing, but you can change your consciousness utterly. You can change it so that it's a whole new consciousness. It's a whole new dimension of consciousness. That's what the Buddha did. I mean, utterly. Bhante says that the Buddha is like a whole new species unto himself, because the body of the Buddha when he was alive was still human, but his consciousness had gone beyond ordinary human consciousness. And this model is trying to show that that's also the deepest aspect of our own consciousness, that the potential is there to have a whole new type of consciousness, which might be inconceivable in ordinary terms.
I was just thinking too, Jnanavaca, that if you've got a number of individuals doing that, something completely extraordinary comes into being, doesn't it?
Yes, maybe we'll come on to the collective aspect of that as well. But that is very important. One of the things, well, I was just trying to indicate earlier, is that this whole new enlightened kind of consciousness is also the nature of a force. It's of the nature of a will. So it is of the nature of a force of love, of compassion, that wants to alleviate suffering. And because it's not my consciousness or your consciousness, it's more, well, what Bhante says is it's more likely to arise if there's a group of us, a collective of us, trying to open up to it. And that's what our Sangha, particularly the order, is conceived of, as a number of people who are trying to open up to this other dimension and allow that dimension to be a force that comes through us, and that would be a force for good in the world. But more prosaically, another way of talking about it yesterday, I was saying, is that the world is facing intractable problems. Human beings always have faced intractable problems because there's always the problem of death. But in some ways, the world's in more of a mess. We've made the world more of a mess than ever before. And I don't think the solutions are going to be at their own level. I think that the challenge for humanity is to rise to another level of consciousness, which isn't based in self-centeredness and egotism and the delusion of that. So this is very, very important for, well, I think in a way Buddhism is very important for the world. Okay, so look, it's 11 o'clock. I'd like us to maybe have a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back, and I'd like to go into these, the delusion, but also the way out of the delusion a little bit more. Okay, so shall we come back at just after 10 past?
Yeah.
Good. So yes, there's a few more questions. And I'll see if I can, so Jules, can you go through absolute and relative? Thanks, you've explained my question. So Jules, are you happy with, do you want me to, where are you, Jules?
No, I'm happy.
Okay, okay. Sue Budden, might want to wave at us, Sue. There you go. Says, can we equate Alia with Buddha nature? Yeah, Buddha nature is a term that's used for this potential that we have within us of realization, of enlightenment. And you could equate, I guess, the absolute Alia. I don't know if this is done traditionally or not, because what we're doing is looking at different models from different bits of the Buddhist tradition. But I think what Buddha nature is getting at is similar to what we're calling the absolute Alia. Yeah. Mia, where are you, Mia? Oh yes, hello. Mia says, aren't the seeds our subconscious parts, or is that entirely not part of this model? I think it's just a different model, Mia. I don't know how to relate Western notions of consciousness and mind to this model. I haven't done enough thinking about that, and I don't even know if they're compatible. But the seeds are not really, karma is more than, karma is not the same, seeds of karmic consequences are not the same as the subconscious, because it's said that, for example, that karma can go over lifetimes, and that's not quite the notion that we have in the West. It's a very different notion. I think and of course, as you practice, and I don't know, Mia, what you think about the law of karma, but I think as you practice, you sometimes just get a sense that there are things that are happening in your life that just don't feel like coincidence. There's a patterning that's unfolding in your life that just doesn't feel like coincidence. Sometimes you can meet people and you think, that isn't a coincidence that, you know, meet people for the first time, I mean, and you think that person has come into my life and it doesn't feel like an accident. Sometimes, you know, you can read something and it feels like, that's just what I needed to read. At this moment, I'm getting a message, a teaching, something's unfolding for me that isn't an accident. Not if you have those experiences of sort of synchronicities, or perhaps that would be, you know, I can't say for sure, but maybe they're indications of karma working in your life.
Very quick question on
Oh, somebody said something. Hello.
I wanted to say something, because
Go on, Mia.
How you described it is it makes sense, as though there are kind of these seeds might be directing some of the positive things happening in your life. But I guess if you turn it around, I guess it becomes a bit tricky, because you could say, well, then we go into that notion of, you know, usual kind of Western simplistic view of karma, if something bad happens to you, oh, you know, it's just bad karma, you've done something in the past.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. One of Bante's caused the delusion. I want to look at the manas a bit more deeply. And then I want you to start thinking about what positive things of practice can you do to get out of this human predicament of delusion? How do we reduce the poisons? How do we work with the poisons? How do we let this radiant consciousness break through? That's what I'd like us to start thinking about. And then I'm going to ask you to talk about that in groups. So first of all, if we go to, I'm going to share the diagrams again. Can you see that? Can you see that?
No.
No. Oh, I've forgotten to share. Sorry. Can you see that? Okay, good. So at the level of the green sense consciousnesses, the key teaching here is that, look, we can act skillfully or unskillfully. I mean, sometimes our motives are mixed and we act in mixed ways, but skillful action is said to be action that comes from states of mind based in awareness, generosity, metta, love. And unskillful acts are rooted in greed and hatred and unawareness. So part of our task is, at the level of our sense consciousnesses, the green bits, to move towards more and more skillful action. But at the level of the manas, the blue bits, the manas isn't under our control in a at least as it's given to us. We've inherited it from lots of previous lives. Even to be human is to have a manas. And the manas has some delusions built into it, but they're not our fault. Arta Priya was just pointing out, just before some of you came back from tea, that the manas is not our fault. We don't have to feel bad about having some delusions in the manas. We don't have to feel bad about it because it's the part of the human condition. It's part of the unenlightened human condition. Nevertheless, the manas does have kleshas. It's the source of some of the kleshas, which means poisons. It's the source of them. And these kleshas are inherent in unenlightened consciousness. So it's not that we need to feel bad about them. And here they are. According to this model, there are 4 Atman kleshas. Atman klesha means that they're kleshas about the self or notions about the self. And they're intrinsic to the manas. They're intrinsic to the manas, according to this model. And remember, it's just a model, but it's a useful model to know that these are the sorts of things that keep us unenlightened at a deeper level. These are the sorts of things that are keeping us unenlightened. So I'll just go through them. So first of all, there's Atma Moha, which means there's ignorance about the self. And the basic ignorance about the self is that I exist as a fixed entity that's separate from the rest of the universe. Buddhism's saying that that's a construction. It's a delusion. It's not how it is. We know that we're not really separate. Every time we eat and drink and urinate and defecate, we're interacting. Even every time we breathe, we're interacting with the environment. So we can't be physically separate. consciousness, as we've been exploring, isn't really separate. We're not really separate from the world around us or from the way we relate to that world around us, including other people. We're more like processes. We're dynamic. There is a dynamic continuity in us, but it's dynamic. It's always moving. So Atma Moha is this ignorance that says, oh yeah, I am a fixed me. And it's not a concept, it's a deep instinct. It's a deep instinct to say, I'm the same person as I was yesterday, or last year, or 10 years ago, or when I was 7. When we look more closely, that can't be true. But not only are we ignorant of what the self is or isn't, Atma Drushti, the next one, says that we have views about it. So the ignorance isn't just a passive ignorance, it's active. We think we know. Not only don't we know, but we have views and we think we do know. Some of those views we started looking at yesterday when I was saying, when you were looking in your groups at ways that you identify with self. They're examples of views about self. So there's this passive sort of ignorance that's just born from lifetimes of ignorance. It's a nature of unenlightenment to have ignorance about self. And then, yeah, we add on these views about ourselves. The third one and the fourth one are more to do with our emotions rather than our views. So Atmasneha, infatuation about self, is to do with, we think that we're the center of the universe. We're really, really, really somehow deeply concerned with me as the center of the universe. In your case, you as the center of the universe. We're infatuated with that. What happens to me is the most important thing in my day. Even if all that happens is that we've run out of bread in my community. Actually, we've got hot cross buns, so we're all right. But that seems like a really important thing. When frankly, I only have to look around me and I realize that, me not having toast is not the most important thing in the universe. But the emotions go deep. There's infatuation with self. And then Atmamana is pride in self. We think we're special. It's related to this infatuation, but we hold on to our sense of me with a lot of pride. Even if we don't like ourselves, we still have, in a way, this inverted pride sometimes. Like, I really don't. I'm really bad. But it's like an emotional poison. So you might make a note of those, and then I'm going to go back to, can I stop sharing? Maybe, yeah. Now the Alya, so that's the Manas. The Alya is just pure, pristine. It doesn't have any delusion. So in a way, the delusions arise with the Manas. And with those sense consciousnesses, we can act more or less skillfully. If we act skillfully, in a way, we're eroding some of those delusions. And if we act unskillfully, we're reinforcing them. But what I'd like you to think about in groups is apart from skillful action, and well, you can even talk about skillful action and make it more specific, how do you work with eroding those poisons, those glaciers? So there's ignorance of self, infatuation about self, ignorance about self, views about self, infatuation about self, and pride in self. How do you work with, in your actual experience, what's worked for you in your practice, in working to undermine those kleshas, those poisons? And also, a more positive way of thinking about it is what helps you sort of glimpse the radiance of this Alia? What helps you glimpse something beyond the delusion? Because sometimes, as we all have a sense, something breaks through. We're transported, as it were, into another sort of experience. What helps you? I mean, talking personally, not just theoretically. So does that make sense, those kind of two questions? How do you work with those delusions and poisons? And in a way, it's the same question put more positively. What helps you break through into a more positive consciousness? Whether that's the Alia or just a glimpse of something more positive, it doesn't really matter. What helps you have a more positive experience of consciousness? So let's have 20 minutes in groups. We'll come back just after 10 to 12. Okay. Okay, is everybody back, Kamlanaga? Yeah, very good. Okay, very good. So it'd be good to hear from you as to what sorts of things you found help you move to a more positive consciousness, to maybe allow this radiance to shine through a little bit more, or more negatively, what helps you work on these kleshas, these poisons. Would anybody like to say anything? Yeah, Dharmanatha, I saw your hand go up.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. And the first thing I'd like to do is just observe that we've sort of fallen into the habit a little bit of speaking for our groups. And I'd just like to invite, it's a fantastic little discussion. Make sure that they feel free to pipe up and tell me to shut up. But I mean, I will say we dwelt quite a bit on others and the how we work within friendships to see ourselves more clearly, to see our behaviour more clearly, polishing the mirror of friendship.
Yes.
And how we work with the difficult people.
Right.
How, I was reminded of how Shantideva said somewhere that, they are the bodhisattvas that are helping us to cultivate our, to get rid of the kleshas, to eliminate the kleshas. But yeah, I really would like to say, if anybody in my group wants to wave their hands, maybe not now, but maybe...
Now's fine as well.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to open it up to them.
Yeah, let's just...
Yeah, the others.
Anybody want to speak?
I thought I saw Martin moving towards his mute button then. Yeah, I did. Go on, Martin.
Okay, I was talking in the group. Hi, Jnanavaca. I was talking in the group about friends and about in confessional practice, for instance. I'm able to kind of use them to see more of my repeated patterns of behavior.
Yeah.
So if I'm continually confessing the same thing and feel trapped in the behavior, it's helpful to have other people's slightly distanced objective view about what might be underlying that.
Yeah.
And then the other element that I think is important for me is the painful experiences. So when I get into conflict with somebody, when I hurt somebody, or somebody's telling me I'm not listening to them, or what my behavior is difficult for them, that's an opportunity to learn and grow. Whereas I think prior to my engagement with the Dharma, I would have felt hurt, and I would have tried to defend my ego, and I would have put the problem left the problem with them, the difficulty with them.
Yeah. So very, very good, Martin. Thank you. And thank you, Jnanavaca. I think there's something very, very important that you've both brought out, which is that when it comes to our ethical life, and when it comes to softening our egotism, we really do need other people. I don't think it's really possible to do it on one's own, even if you get really deep into meditation. I think that other people are invaluable in mirroring us back, but also pointing out our blind spots, and saying, look, you've just hurt me, or what you've just done has had this consequence upon me. It's really, really important. And then what you were saying, Martin, about confession, I think other people, well, I mean, it's possible to confess to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in your imagination and in puja and things. It's possible to do that. But I think it's really powerful to have somebody else there, and particularly if it's a friend or friends who know us and who regard us positively and are supportive, to be able to say, look, I've done it again. And they can say, yes, but look, they can sometimes point out that we've made progress. Like sometimes it's easy for us to feel like we're just not making any progress. And other people can see the progress perhaps better than we can and say, look, you have made progress. You know, you used to be like this much more. And now you're able to get out of this negative mental state much more easily. They can point positives out to us, or they can say, look, I just keep noticing that you keep confessing the same thing, and it doesn't seem like you are making progress. And are you going to do something about it? And what do you need to do? That's really, really helpful as well. But both of you mentioned friendship, and there's something else about friendship that's quite wonderful, which is sometimes you know, you can get into communication with a friend and you can just feel deeply in communication with them, deeply in sync with them. And in that sort of communication, in that interaction, you can sort of free yourself from your own self-preoccupation. You can go beyond yourself. And if both of you are doing that, if both of you are working on, I don't know, freeing yourselves, or if it happens that both of you sort of forget your self-preoccupation, then it's possible that somehow between you another type of consciousness arises that's very, very satisfying, very, very satisfying in itself. Communication can be a route to this sort of freedom from self. And I think Bhante has really seen that in a way that not all Buddhist teachers have. And I think he's really brought out the importance of friendship, the importance of Sangha, the importance of communication. And I think in Triratna we're blessed with that. We really are blessed with so much opportunity for friendship. And even in these times where we can't meet, you know, we've found ways round virtually and so forth. Yeah, I just want to underline that friendship can be a real opportunity. Thank you, Jnanavaca. Thank you, Martin. Anybody else want to speak? Yes, I've seen Anne's hand go up. Anne?
In our group, Arta Siddhi had a very important point that I found very helpful, which is that we can all reach a threshold beyond which we think things are impossible. I'm talking about our own our own day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And he was pointing out that if we keep, it's even more important to practice then. So and we keep moving, and in that way, we keep moving the threshold further. I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting him, but this is how I understood what he was saying.
Yeah.
So that a terrible, or even not terrible, you know, a tough time.
Yes.
A tough time that we're going through. We might think we have reached that. Say we've reached our personal threshold.
Yes.
He was suggesting that's a very important moment to practice even more in a way, or just keep doing what you're doing, and it will keep moving the threshold, even if it's imperceptible.
Yes.
Further.
Yes.
Each time.
Yes.
And I thought that was a really great piece of advice.
Yes. Yes.
I'd like to tell everyone about that.
Yes. No, thank you, Anne. That's really good. I think that's really good. Thank you, Anne, and thanks, Arta City, for highlighting something that is really important. I think that, you know, I've talked about self-infatuation and pride in the negative sense and stuff, but also it's true that we're capable of more than we think we are. Very often we're capable of much more than we think we are. Very often we limit ourselves because we just don't think we're big enough to do something, to tackle something, to face something, to grow. But actually, potentially, well, the teaching is, and the teaching in this model is, that we're potentially Buddhas. We're potentially, consciousness has this potential intrinsically within it. And I think sometimes the most creative, productive times, this is what I think you're saying, Anne, happen when we think we've reached the limit of our capacities, our capabilities. And if we can stay with the experience, if we can stay with practice, often that's when breakthroughs happen, breakthroughs into something beyond what we're capable of. Now, again, that's a judgment, isn't it? Sometimes where somebody's limit is it's going to be different for different people. It's going to be different for all of us, of course. And sometimes it's helpful to have our friends point out that, look, you can do more. Look, you are capable of more. But also sometimes we need our friends to point out, look, I think you need to step back. I think you've pushed enough and you probably need to step back and have a break. Because the Dharma life isn't just about strain, nor and pushing and pushing, but nor is it about just relaxing and lying around watching Netflix. And I don't know why that comes to mind for me, but there's this wonderful teaching of the Buddha to Sona. Sona was a disciple of the Buddha, and he, before he became a monk, was a musician, and he came from a very wealthy background and was rather had a very privileged upbringing and was rather a delicate young man. And when he encountered the Buddha and when he became a monk, he was full of zeal and wanted to really strive towards enlightenment. And he's one day he's doing walking meditation in the forest, and of course he'd be barefoot, and he's walking, you know, so much that his feet just start to bleed. And the Buddha hears of this and calls Sona to him. And the analogy the Buddha uses is he says, Sona, when a lute string, you know, a lute, an Indian lute, when the lute string, when you're playing the lute and the string is too loose, does it make a good sound? And Sona says, no, it doesn't, Lord. And the Buddha says, when it's too tight, does it make a good sound, a harmonious sound? And Sona says, no, it doesn't, Lord. And the Buddha says, just so, the string has to be just tight enough It has to be just tight enough to make a pleasing sound. And your practice, Sona, should be like that. He's saying to Sona that you've been pushing it too much, you know, and you don't need to physically bleed in order to gain enlightenment. You've been pushing it too much. But if the lute string's too loose, that won't make a pleasing sound. We won't make progress. So often we'll have a bias towards looseness or tightness, won't we? Depending on, you know, who we are, our personality, our conditioning. Mine is definitely towards looseness, I think. Maybe I go too far the other way, but I don't think I've ever gone too tight. Not that Artapriya is shaking his head. I might have done, Artapriya. Anyway, sometimes it's good to have friends who know us, like Artapriya, point out what our tendency is, and you know, how to push ourselves if needs be, or how to ease off if needs be. But yes, really good, Anne. Thank you very much. Sona and the lute string. Anybody else? What works for you? What really works for you in expanding your consciousness beyond the narrowness that we sometimes impose? Oh yes, Kamlamati, I see. And also I saw Sue. Did you raise your hand, Sue?
Can Sue go first?
Sue go first, yeah.
Just briefly, well, what helps me is retreats and practice and Dharma talks and teachings.
Yes.
I felt my spirits really just rise and rise over this retreat, and I just feel so much more positive and inspirited. For me, that's just so important.
It's so important, isn't it?
Yeah. And also what's really feeding in at the moment is the notion of the Cambridge Sangha, which I've only been part of since lockdown, because I live 50 miles away. I'm part of the Peterborough Sangha. And I've just been frequenting the Cambridge Sangha more and more and more, and getting more and more out of it. And now this weekend, I see all these faces that I've been seeing for the best part of a year. And it's really quite emotional for me. And that's really giving me a sense of, yeah, you know, this is the movement. This is the forward movement. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jnanavaca, and everybody individually and collectively.
Really lovely to hear. It's very moving to hear, Sue. And one of the beautiful things about Sangha is that, I don't know, we really we gain a lot of inspiration from knowing that we're not alone in this journey. And the journey is a you know, it can at times be a very challenging one. At times it's very beautiful and joyous, but it's also got its challenges. And knowing that we're not alone, that we're part of a community, a living, vibrant Sangha, where we're practicing together, is gold. It's just gold. It's just fantastic. And the fact that you've felt that even through this lockdown, Sue, just shows that, well, of course it shows that through technology we can reach each other, but I think it also shows that communication is an act of imagination, that connection is an act of imagination, that empathy is an act of imagination. It's an act of consciousness. And yes, we're physically separate, but consciousness, imagination can reach beyond those boundaries of space, and we can feel connected with each other. And it's tangible. It's not just an abstract idea. It's real. And then practice, Sue, you were just saying about how retreats really help you. And I think that's just so important, that we have periods of intensification of our practice. And on retreat, what you're having is more dharmic input, more meditation, and more Sangha. and ritual, of course. I'm going to come on to ritual and imagination maybe tomorrow, and it's just it's completely invaluable, that that intensification, and very often it's just hard to do on our own. It's very hard to do on our own. It is possible to do on our own, but I think a collective retreat just offers fantastic conditions. I'm delighted that you feel, connected to the Cambridge Sangha in that way, Sue, and particularly through lockdown. I think it also means, well, I mean, I'm sure this will happen, that we must carry on with some sort of online activity. You're in Peterborough, Sue, and connected to Cambridge, and I know lots of people are connected to Sanghas throughout the world, even when they're geographically distant. And this, if there is anything good that's coming out of this horrible pandemic, it is that we're being able to use technology to communicate the Dharma more widely. Yeah, really good. Yeah, very good. Kamalamati, do you want to add anything or say anything?
Well, I will, only because it is very relevant, I think, that I come in a lot and talk a lot and have always got something to say. And I can take, more than my share, so to speak, of the space and the time. And I think this is to do with these kleshas, to do with self-infatuation and thinking I'm special and so on. And I was telling my group yesterday that I at the end of primary school, my report said Mary is a natural leader. And I think I kind of lived up to this kind of identity for many years. And it was only when I came into the Sangha that I started to get some awareness through friendships, of this tendency I have to kind of be quite a sort of show off and be star of my own movie or something. So I think friendship, but I really wanted to bring in, I know you said you're going to talk about it tomorrow, but the imaginative aspect and the ritual. And for me, connecting with the Buddha has become a very, very important source for me of letting go, actually, of this, I know the answers, I've got to sort it out. If I don't do it, nobody will. And actually surrendering to the Buddha, particularly, when I've been in times of when I've run out of ideas and so on, surrendering myself to the Buddha has been enormously opening for me.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kamalamati. Well, one of the things you've just said is that your qualities as a leader. What's interesting there for me is that our strengths can also be our weaknesses, and because there's real strengths in being a leader, isn't there? And again, Sangha friendship in Sangha, not Sangha as an abstract, but real friendship can help us grow beyond the weaknesses and let the positives shine. It's not that we are all, our characteristics are all sort of unmixed. Often our strengths are our weaknesses in different situations. And I think that it's subtle, as it were. And that's very, very important to sort of realize, and friendship can help us do that. And then yes, imagination. What we've been talking about it in conceptual terms. We've been trying to talk about consciousness in conceptual terms, but you can see how quite quickly you reach the limit of what you can say in conceptual terms, or reach the limit of what you can think in conceptual terms. This consciousness that we're trying to point to, the Alaya that we're trying to point to, this radiant consciousness that's beyond time and space and beyond separation, not graspable. It's not graspable by the rational mind. You can see how Buddhism has come up with rituals and imagination and practices that open the heart as a way of approaching, pointing to this freedom beyond time and space. And when you bring to mind the Buddha, as Kamala Matti has, as you've been saying, you're bringing to mind an embodiment of this consciousness. Consciousness isn't an abstract thing. You're bringing to mind someone who realized this consciousness and became inextricably part of it, and a channel for it as well. And when you bring the Buddha to mind, if you can connect with Shraddha, with faith, what it does is it connects us to the ideal, but from an emotional perspective. And it gives us confidence that, well, ideally, Shraddha gives us confidence that we too can realize what the Buddha realized. Another thing that you said, Kamala Matti, was that surrender. You used the word surrender. And it's a very important way of practicing, which is to say, look, I am opening up myself. I bow down, as it were. I'm letting go of me and my smallness to something bigger. I'm allowing something more to come through me. Theistic traditions do this, of course, very naturally. You open up to God. In Buddhism, of course, there isn't a creator God. There isn't a notion of a creator God. But we do need to open up to something beyond us, to someone beyond us. And the Buddha is that, as it were, person that we open up to. The Buddha isn't physically here anymore, so we have to use our imagination. And when we imagine the Buddha, we can imagine him as radiant. And then later Buddhist tradition has given us other forms that we can imagine, that are all the archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are imaginal forms of this enlightened mind, this radiance personified in beautiful colors, with each pointing to different qualities of this mind. And devotion, surrender, very, very important. Imagination, if you can start to connect in this way, it's a way into, or way to allow this other dimension, this other consciousness to come through us. Yeah. Let's see if we've got another one or two more. We've got time for maybe one or two more, if there are. If not, I'll give you some. Articity, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Jnanavaca, I wondered if you'd talk a bit more about the arts. We've been exploring that on this retreat. I certainly know for me, I think it's fair to say that this last year has been incredibly sort of demanding year, and I think without the arts, I probably wouldn't have been able to do what I did. So sometimes people debate, don't they, intellectually about whether the arts can transform you, but I know that in my experience. And it's been that, ritual is very important to me too, but actually I've sort of needed the arts, not just ritual. I think ritual in itself wouldn't do it. So I just wanted to ask you to talk a bit more about that area as a way of glimpsing this consciousness beyond and the significance of it.
Yeah. I might broaden it to talk about beauty, because beauty can be through the arts. It could be through visual art, music, whatever. It can also be through nature, anything beautiful in our surroundings, particularly in the natural world, if that's all right, Articity. Although, of course, the arts are a medium for beauty. And what happens is really wonderful when we are in touch with beauty. There's in that experience of beauty, there's a thinning of egotism, of this self-infatuation, this self-pride. There's even a sort of thinning of me being a separate thing. When you're in touch with beauty, there's a certain sort of forgetting of self in a positive way. And the image of beauty, whether you're looking at a beautiful thing or listening to some music that's beautiful, or you know, you can be in touch with beauty in all the senses. But let's stick with the visual and the hearing. When you're in touch with those, it's like the object that you're finding beautiful is speaking to you of deeper meaning. It's not just pretty, as it were. If it's really beautiful, it's hinting, not more than hinting, sometimes pointing to real value in the universe. It's like it becomes an emblem of value. So I was talking about, you know, my first retreat and looking at this tree and thinking it's the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. I wasn't consciously thinking, oh, that's pointing to value and meaning. It's just that in the experience of beauty, there is a deeply satisfying sense that, oh yes, this is important. This is what's of value. And art can do that, but nature can do that as well. So on Friday, in our community, some of us were listening to Bath's St. John Passion, sort of to mark Good Friday, really. And I love the music of St. John Passion particularly. And I did feel, well, during it, I felt thrills of pleasure, sort of energy sort of just filling my body. And then afterwards, it felt like I'd been, I don't know, it felt like I'd been meditating or been doing a puja. It felt like I was in a different state of consciousness because this music was so beautiful. But interestingly, with that music, with Bach's St. John Passion, it was also the words of it, the story, were pointing to meaning. Now, I'm not a Christian, so in a way, all the Christian story I can take poetically. It doesn't for me have a sort of literal meaning, but Christ, as it were, dying on the cross in the music of Bach felt very meaningful. And I'm not a Christian, and I don't want to take that story literally. But today is Easter, and there's meant to be a rebirth. There's meant to be a rebirth. If you take the story, the Christian story, poetically, of spiritual death and spiritual rebirth, of surrender to something divine, and then a rebirth, a renunciation of this world, and then a rebirth, then it can be very beautiful. But art generally can point to, it doesn't have to be using stories, although stories can be very, very helpful. It could just be sort of abstract beauty without any narrative content, and it can still move you and lift you up. Bhante somewhere says, I think it's in Wisdom Beyond Words, he says the real values are aesthetic, not utilitarian. That most of the, you see, for most of us, and I include myself, it's like I live most of my life in the values of that are utilitarian, like getting what I want and sorting out the business of my life and the emails and the to-do list and you know, the shopping and acquiring and all of that. That can take up so much of life. And then we allow little bits of, you know, the weekend or free evenings to enjoy beauty. But Bhante is saying, no, it's much more in accordance with the Dharma if most of our life was preoccupied with beauty, if we were seeing the world through the eyes of beauty. And And sure, we have to do the things like emails and work and whatever, but they should be occupying a smaller part of the mandala of our whole life. That's what he's getting at. It's hard to do that, but it's worth striving for, because, you know, no matter how many emails I get through, I'm not going to, and even if they're really worthy things, it's not going to lead me to transcendence, to fulfillment. Even if I get to the bottom of my to-do list, which one day I might, probably I'm going to die and there'll still be 50 emails that are unread and requiring attention. And I won't be any closer to enlightenment. Whereas beauty can take us into, transport us into a realm of meaning and value. And why it does that is that in the experience of beauty, there's a self-forgetting. And it's as if we merge with, maybe I don't like that language of merging, but there's a thinning of the barrier between me and the object of beauty. And the object of beauty ceases to be just a material object. It shines with meaning and value. And what Subhuti says is that it becomes a true image for us. It's not just a tree, it's an image. And it's a radiant image. And actually the world is just images. We think that it's full of things, but they're images. And in the experience of beauty, the world starts to be an image. At least the object of beauty starts to be an image. And we experience ourselves in a new way. Consciousness starts to be more fluid and expansive. So we experience a sort of freedom from this concretization of self. All of that loosens. And we, in a way, we start to feel like an image, which is what we are. And then what links us to the object of beauty is the imagination. So one way of talking about it that Bhante uses is that it's almost like image imagining image rather than subject looking at object. And image imagining image is more like reality is. That's more how things really are. That's pointing to this transcendent freedom. So beauty can be like an intermediary between us and the Alaya, this radiant consciousness. It's very, very important, partly because it's you can train yourself as well in appreciating beauty. Part of what Triratna does at its best is give a training in the aesthetic, in the imagination. We can train ourselves, but also it's important because it's pleasurable. So important to have pleasure in the Dharma life. And, you know, in this time of pandemic, when the world around us, all we're hearing about is death and sickness and more crisis. And sometimes it feels hopeless. It's so important to have some pleasure in our life, and beauty can give us that. And it can be simple things. It can just be like going for a walk in nature and starting to appreciate that the blossom has come out. In Bethnal Green, there's a magnolia tree that I try and go and look at every day. And each day it's becoming more and more beautiful. Actually, it's probably past its best now, but it's absolutely exquisite. And if you're in Cambridge, well, Bethnal Green doesn't have a patch on Cambridge. There's so much beauty around you in Cambridge. So I'd, yes, encourage you to use this notion of the imagination. Take it seriously, not use it. Take it seriously. Take seriously that beauty isn't just about entertainment or a little bit of titillation of the senses. It's an important medium to glimpse a new type of consciousness. look, that's all we've got time for. So let's leave it on that note for today. And then tomorrow I might say a little bit more about the imagination as a way into what we're doing. Yeah. All right then.